Hi everyone, I'm John Mitchell and welcome to Unit 3 and 4 Business Management. Today we're going to look at Unit 3 Area of Study 1, and what will happen with these videos is that they'll cover each area of study, but they'll also pretty much follow the study design point by point. There'll be some longer ones, but we try and make them as quick as possible so that they're easy to absorb and understand. And these series are firstly in Area Study 1 looking at large-scale organisations in context, and it's important to note, if you weren't aware already, that Unit 3 and 4 only looks at large-scale organisations. So it's important, firstly, if that's the case, to identify or define what one is. And so a large organisation is one that has 200 or more employees. That's our number one rule, and that's the thing we look for first and foremost, is how many employees they have. And if they have 200 or more employees, we can class them as a large-scale organisation. But there are some other characteristics that they have, and that we'll go through those. So assets of $200 million or more, substantial revenue or substantial income, or you could even say that they have revenue or income in the millions of dollars or billions of dollars. They're transnational or have multiple locations, which means that they can operate in Australia and overseas. And there's a complex management. They often have a complex management structure and run by a board of directors. Now, it's important to note that in the 2013 exam, the first question on the exam was identify two characteristics of a large-scale organisation, and these were the only characteristics that were allowed in that answer. Even though there are some different ones listed in the varying textbooks, these were the only ones that were allowed. It was black and white. There was no variations allowed of this, and so I always tell my students, or since then I've told them, only stick to these characteristics. Now, when we think of large organisations, it's often common to think about companies, large companies, because they're the ones that are usually in the news. But there are different types of large-scale organisations, and we need to know them, and we need to know the differing aims of each of those varying types of organisations. So first of all, we'll start off with a company or a corporation, and their aim is through the sale of goods and services to make a profit and add to net assets. Now, they can be owned privately, so they can be owned, which means they're owned by anywhere from 1 to 50 shareholders, or they can be owned publicly, which means they're listed on a public exchange, such as the Australian Stock Exchange, and they're owned by many shareholders, so any member of the public can buy shares in that particular company. They're controlled by a board of directors, and some common examples are the Commonwealth Bank and Telstra, and there's obviously thousands of others. The next type of organisation is a government business enterprise. So you might see the letters there, GBE, and their aim is to provide a service or product to the public and make a profit. Now, if you look at that aim, it's virtually the same as a corporation, and that's because it is run like a corporation. Now, the only difference is that it's owned by the government, and it says there and shareholders. So what there's a shareholder minister that reports to the government. And so they're controlled by a board of directors still, and then they report to the government through that shareholder minister. And there's less examples of these because the government often sells off these type of assets and puts them into the private sector, so that they can be shareholders from the public can own these companies. But a current example is Australia Post. Now, a government department, this is starting to vary a little bit from the other two that we've just gone through. So their aim is to provide a service to the community and satisfy social or political objectives. Now, what that may mean, so I've got an example there of the Department of Education. So let's say, for example, you've got we're up for election, and the government comes out and says that they're going to provide a certain amount of funding to schools or to TAFEs, and in order to help them win the election. So that's a promise they've made, and then what they can do, well, hopefully if they keep their promise, if they get into government, that they are then satisfying their political objectives by providing that funding and providing those type of programs that they promised. So that's how a government department, by providing a service to the community, they're satisfying a social objective because it's important for education, and there's many different departments around, but it's also satisfying their political objective, so a goal that they've set out to achieve. So they're owned by the government and they're controlled by the government, and a government minister is in charge of a particular department. So some examples of the Department of Education and the Department of Defence, the Department of Human Services. There's lots and lots of different departments at state level and at federal level of government. Finally, we have our charities and foundations, and their aim is to provide goods, services or fund marginalised groups to the community, and they're normally controlled by a board of directors. So they're there to, I'm sure lots of you have given to a charity before. You're giving money to help out marginalised groups, and that's what they do. So an example of a charity is the Alzheimer's Australia, and what they do, they collect money and then help provide services to families that are suffering, whether they've got a family member suffering Alzheimer's. And the Shane Warne Foundation is a common foundation where they raise money to help Aussie kids. So they're the different types of organisations, and now each one of those organisations have managers involved in them. So their job is to coordinate the resources and activities to ensure the organisation is achieving the goals that the board of directors has set out, or that the key members that are controlling the organisation have set out. And every organisation, no matter how large it is, even if it's the government, have limited resources, and it's up to management to decide how best to use those resources. So even if it's the government and they earn billions of dollars in tax revenue, it's still not unlimited money. So no matter what happens, those resources are limited, and it's a manager's job to try and use those efficiently. So some examples of resources that are available to organisations: they're physical, which means their land, equipment, materials; human resources, which is the employees; finance, obviously money; and information, which could be information on how to produce a product or any information on their consumers. And what happens, so the different tasks and roles that are often arranged into similar areas. So it could be that marketing roles are part of a marketing department, or human resource roles are part of a human resource department, and those areas can be referred to as management functions. And the typical management functions that an organisation has are marketing, which is in charge of the promotion of the organisation and its products; the human resources, which manages the relationships between an organisation and the employees; finance and admin, obviously in charge of the money and administration activities; operations, we'll go in depth in operations when we do area of study 3, and that's the function that produces the goods and services of the organisation; research and development could be developing new products, or even discovering new ways of producing products and services. And then information technology is obviously in charge of the technology and the communication systems throughout the organisation. So just to recap, to defining all the characteristics of a large-scale organisation: 200 or more employees, assets of $200 million, they have substantial revenue or income or even profit in the millions or billions of dollars, and then they have multiple locations or transnational, and another characteristic is that they can have a complex management structure. And the different types, and we need to know the different types and their differing aims. We have a corporation, government business enterprise, government department, charities and foundations, and the key management functions that we've got there are marketing, human resource management, research and development, operations, finance and admin, and I've left off information technology there. So for questions and activities or more on today's topic, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.